Ludwig Wittgenstein, who lived from 1889 to 1951, produced two radically different philosophies within one lifetime. In his early work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he believed that language mirrored the logical structure of the world. By the late 1920s, he had abandoned that view. His later philosophy, presented in the Philosophical Investigations, published posthumously in 1953, explored language not as a fixed logical system, but as a collection of living human practices. It marks one of the most important turning points in modern philosophy. After publishing the Tractatus, Wittgenstein thought he had solved every philosophical problem. However, discussions with Frank Ramsey, who persuaded him that what he had called logical impossibilities were really physical impossibilities, and a challenge from the Italian economist Piero Sraffa, who brushed his chin and asked, "What is the logical form of that?" forced him to rethink. Wittgenstein came to see that meaning is not determined by logical form, but by how words are used within human life. Language, he now thought, is part of our activity. To understand meaning, we must look at how we actually use words. The Philosophical Investigations has a very different style from the Tractatus. It does not propose a theory. It moves through short remarks and examples, crisscrossed in every direction. Wittgenstein writes, "Philosophy may in no way interfere with the actual use of language. It can in the end only describe it, for it cannot give it any foundation either. It leaves everything as it is." The philosopher's task, therefore, is not to build logical systems, but to describe and clarify how our concepts work in everyday life. Wittgenstein now saw language as a form of human behaviour, something we learn and use within shared activities. Our practices supply the criteria for whether a word is used correctly. For example, if I ask someone to stand roughly there, the meaning of roughly depends on our shared situation. In a small room, the distance range is quite narrow. Outside a shop it is much wider. Meaning, therefore, is bound to forms of life, the ways human beings live, act and respond together. There are as many language games, ways in which we use language, as there are human practices. Each is a small instance of language in action, giving and obeying orders, describing, joking, praying, greeting, calculating or teaching. Wittgenstein used the term game metaphorically to emphasize that speaking is an activity governed by pattern and expectations. Because meaning depends on use, one might think language becomes vague. Wittgenstein's answer is the notion of family resemblance. Most of our concepts do not have strict boundaries or single defining features. Instead, they share overlapping similarities, just as family members resemble each other in various ways. His famous example is the word game. There are board games, card games, ball games, children's games. None share a single essence, but there is a network of resemblances: competition, amusement, rules, skill, luck, crisscrossing like the strands of a rope. Language works in the same way. We recognise these resemblances rather than trace everything to one essence or definition. Because meaning depends on use, it is also linked with following rules. We do not normally consult explicit rules when we speak. We simply act correctly within our linguistic practice. Learning a language is learning to take part in those shared activities. Wittgenstein asks us to imagine teaching a pupil the rule add to. The pupil may at first extend the sequence correctly, then suddenly write 1000, 1004, 1008 instead of 1000, 1002, 1004. He insists he is following the rule. How can we show that he is wrong? No written formula can specify every possible application of a rule, because any rule can be interpreted in many ways. There is a way of grasping a rule which is not an interpretation, Wittgenstein writes, but which is exhibited in what we call obeying the rule and going against it in actual cases. Understanding, then, is not a private mental state, but a public activity, a knowing how to go on within a shared form of life. This discussion of rule following leads to Wittgenstein's famous argument against the possibility of an essentially private language. He distinguishes this from a language that is merely secret or coded, which could in principle be translated. A truly private language would be one that only its inventor could understand, because its words referred to private inner sensations. Wittgenstein asks us to imagine a person who records each time he experiences a particular feeling by writing S in a notebook. Because there is no external way to check whether he applies the symbol consistently, whatever seems right to him will be right, and, as Wittgenstein notes, that only means that here we cannot talk about right. Without the possibility of correction, the idea of rule following, and therefore of meaning, collapses. A language understandable only to one person could not count as a language at all, since the distinction between being right and seeming right would disappear. To reinforce the point, Wittgenstein considers how we speak about sensations, such as pain. We teach children to replace crying with words like ouch, but these words are expressions, not inner descriptions. When I say I am in pain, I'm not reporting a private object called pain, I am expressing a state that others can recognize through my behavior. Wittgenstein's well-known beetle in the box example makes the same point. Suppose everyone has a box containing something called a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box. The contents might differ, or the boxes might even be empty. Yet everyone still uses the word beetle and communicates perfectly well. Whatever is inside the box plays no role in the meaning of the word. Its sense is determined by how the word is used in shared practice. This does not make Wittgenstein a behaviourist. He does not deny the inner life. Rather, he shows that our talk about inner states is woven into public criteria of behaviour. An inner process stands in need of outward criteria, he writes. We see someone's sadness or joy in their behaviour. We do not infer it from hidden causes. The inner and the outer are conceptually interwoven, and removing either would make our psychological language unintelligible. By demonstrating that meaning must be public, Wittgenstein dissolves several long-standing philosophical problems. If meaning is public, then solipsism, the idea that only one mind exists, collapses. Likewise, dualism and physicalism, which assume a sharp divide between inner mental states and outer behaviour, lose their hold. Wittgenstein shows that our concepts of mind, knowledge and sensation depend on shared human practices. In overturning the notion of a purely private inner world, he also overturns a tradition of philosophical skepticism extending back to Descartes. Wittgenstein's later philosophy replaces the rigid logical structure of the Tractatus with a view of language as flexible, diverse, and inseparable from human life. Understanding is revealed in what we do, and the idea of a private, incommunicable meaning is an illusion. Philosophy's task, he insists, is not to construct theories, but to provide clarity, to look and see how our language actually functions. Don't think but look, he says. By following that advice, Wittgenstein transforms 20th century philosophy replacing the search for logical essence with attention to the ordinary activities that make thought and communication possible.